Very good. So, let's get ourselves down. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome along then to round number 4 of the FRS Season 7 here in Division 1 at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya in Spain for the Spanish Grand Prix. This reprofiled circuit then has seen a number of changes in Formula One's time, and of course, in this year, 2023, we will be seeing a return of the proper final corner, none of that chicane nonsense. So around this circuit then, we have a lot of corners, 16 at the moment in the current configuration, and then a bit of elevation throughout the second sector, and then of course, great big long flat lowest part of the circuit is the start finish straight. The drivers will spend about 59% of the lap at full throttle around this circuit, so one where there is also a mix of different styles and corner types. Turn number 1 then, one of those areas we might see some good action. Remember back to Sebastian Vettel versus Valtteri Bottas down here. On the grass was the Ferrari before it managed to get its way past the Mercedes of the Finn, and then at the end of a DRS straight, one of those great areas you can get a move done. Turn number 4, another good one, because after that move through turn number 1, you can then follow through 2, 3, and then down into 4, and provided you've been able to stick close enough and have that pace, you can potentially send another one up the inside. In terms of our tyre compound, soft, medium, hard as per usual, with then a medium tyre with half a second slower per lap than the soft, and the hard 1.1 seconds slower than the medium. So there we go then. It's a big offset in terms of the performance, and of course, as per usual in F122, we have then the hard and the medium looking much more like the race tyre than the soft, only lasting 10 laps on that latter one. So, that all being said and done then, let's head down to the circuit and see what's happening as far as drivers getting out onto the track is concerned. Now, right now, at the moment, my name is Daniel Gilligan, and alongside me in the virtual commentary box is Sean Provenza. Let's reintroduce you again then. Sean, how are you doing?
Well, I have to unmute myself, which usually will help out quite a lot. But it's good to be here. We're seeing a few cars on circuit. I'm going to try and see who is the dark... of course, it's Elliot. Always Elliot, typically the first one around circuit to get their first lap times in. But yeah, I think we're going to see some interesting choices perhaps in qualifying. It is a circuit that has those big long straights, but also this really tricky mix of corners. Really high downforce can gain you quite a bit of lap time, but only 2 big straight overtaking opportunities, and well, makes the choice of what kind of setup you want to go for a little bit harder than some other circuits.
Certainly, yeah, absolutely, as we alluded to in the build-up and then in that introduction there, and as you've just mentioned too, the circuit of Barcelona de Catalunya does have a number of different configurated corners. You've got these big long sweepers here in the first sector, and then of course in the middle sector that's where things get a little bit more tight and twisty, but still the occasional fast or medium speed corner, and then of course that final section where things really slow down. Even with the new re-profile turn at the end of the second DRS straight, it is still a very dicey part of the circuit to try and get that power down, because then of course the back end can step out, especially in these new cars that are heavier, and of course the downforce is not as refined yet in their early stage of development versus those cars of say 2020, 2021. Now we're on board with Elliott as they head down towards that new re-profiled corner, getting the car turned in there and then running it all the way out to the AstroTurf on the outside before then cutting back in to then get the car slowed down. Now, a lot of drivers favour 4th or 5th gear only throughout this final sector here. Let's see if they're able to do the same, keeping it in 4th, down to 3rd into the chicane then, and then driving out on exit, get that power down through the final turn. They might get the smallest bit of a draft or possibly unsettled dirty air from the car in front, and across the line it's a 1:17.6 for Elliott to set us off with our first time of the day, but I'm sure that they'll be joined in just a few moments time by some other times.
Yeah, Mako goes to the top of the timing sheets in the Aston Martin, a little bit quicker, just a couple of tenths. Daredevil going to cross the line. of course, that bug that tells me that their outlap is over in the third sector, so making it a little harder to pick out who is who. But time's tumbling in. Ruprath in 18.3, we'll expect him to improve quite a bit. F50, driver who spent a little bit of time on Xbox last season, has joined the grid today. He's up in third, and it looks like now MJ Povey, as we would expect, taking over that top spot of the grid.
Absolutely, yeah. Povey has been something of a one-lap masterclass driver, has gotten a good number of poles and a good number of front rows this season as well, and definitely one to look out for in terms of the overall raw pace, although Major Castleman puts in a major upset for Povey this time, a 1:17.1 for the Red Bull driver, and continuing their form at the top of this championship table. Povey then, about 2 tenths off of that, 2.5 tenths off, so they can definitely find some extra time there and get themselves back onto terms. But the driver that I am currently on board with here, we're currently watching as Cryptic makes their way around, but coming through the last couple of corners now is our returning 2 times PC Division 1 champion, as it was back in the day, Fraser. Round the final turn then comes the Mercedes driver, recently christened Mercedes driver, and unsurprisingly, Fraser goes to the top of the timesheets by half a second. It's as though they were never gone.
What a lap for them to put in just right off the gate. I mean, we know pretty much everybody's, Fraser included, is going to talk down their ability, saying, "Oh, I haven't practiced, oh, I haven't done such and such," but that's nonsense. They are straight on the pace right away, as it looks like there's a few drivers kind of having stumbles around the group circuit.
Ooh, big stumble in particular for Cryptic there. They've lost it on the exit of that new re-profiled corner at the start of Sector 3. So they have completely sent it round, and that's going to be curtains for that lap for them. Having to drift it round the corners now in order to keep it going on circuit. And we can see then that Luke, our other returning driver, in P6, 1:17.6 is their opening time. So for 2 drivers with an awful lot of time off, well, there's a second's difference between them. And one of them happens to be the alien that is Fraser. And we mean that in the most loving way, of course, but it's freaky how quickly Fraser can drive a virtual Formula 1 car. But there we are then. They have the provisional pole time, as everybody else has now either set their lap or has got themselves out on circuit with an invalidated lap time. False tax is currently going around at the moment, as just invalidated. That being said, they've already tried 1 lap on that set of tyres already, a 1-time lap, I should say, and they send it round. Luckily, they go back end into the wall first, otherwise an impact of that magnitude would have easily ended their session there. And we've then got Alfie W, Crusoe and Cryptic all yet to set a lap time. Cryptic has not actually completed a full out lap yet. They went out and came straight back in again. And Queasy Pluto then goes across the line, sets themselves a new time of 1:38.4. So a bit of a cool down lap then, it seems. After having their first attempt, they're now going to take a second attempt as they go through the next few corners then. Sean, are you still with us?
Yep, sorry, I was trying to get some invites sorted, but it doesn't seem to be. I don't have Hugh Sam added on here, so hopefully somebody else does and is able to invite him, because he's trying to join, but apparently he's unable to join off the Steam links. I don't know if you have him added on through EA and can try and send him an in-game friend request or game request.
Probably not through EA, but I joined Crusoe via Steam, so I'm wondering if maybe I don't see him in my friends list though. So unfortunately, Hugh Sam or Hughesman, depending on which commentator is in the box with it, they are not available for me to invite, I'm afraid. But yeah, the moment that we saw there as we came back to the action was that Queasy Pluto then making a mistake at the exit of turn number 3. Those tyres are very much done. They need to get themselves in and get those changed in order to go for another attempt. Fraser has decided to get out there early again for another outlap. They are tucked in at the moment behind the AlphaTauri. I believe that's Elliott, and it is, in fact. So my belief would be correct. But yeah, looks as though Elliott and Fraser then both at the same part of the circuit together. They're both on their outlaps, so they're both going to go for a time lap in a few moments' time, both with the flashing red light at the back of the car, of course. So that then indicating that in qualifying at least, that either that your battery is nearly depleted or that you've got the hot lap mode disabled. So you're just on ICE, you're not using that hybrid system, that extra 160 horsepower around the lap, because of course you don't want to be burning it up on your out lap, and that then means you have less for the time lap itself, and indeed even less then in the way of tyre wear as well, tyre life. So through the final turn, they go, and goes Elliott first of all. Fraser comes straight back into the pits. So we're going to watch MJ Povey then, in third place currently in that Williams. And as they head down towards the end of the first sector then, lot of traffic in front of them. Hopefully the Alpine just in front is going to slam on the anchors and get out the way, and they do so, as does the Red Bull. Yeah, so off to the inside for both of them, does not impede the Williams, and so we'll see now as they go up through the second sector, where are they able to gain the time, because it's no longer just about 2/10 or so up to the pole position. It's now nearly a whole second, with the field now being pretty heavily dominated by Fraser's initial time there. Now Fraser is incredibly quick, we know that of course, but they are not invulnerable. They are a driver who does make mistakes occasionally if put under pressure. Chicken Sucker retired from the session.
It looks like he's crashed out in the coming into the final chicane. Might have gotten loose on this right-hander where MJ Povey's coming through and then spear into the inside wall. Yep, sure looks like it.
Absolutely, yeah, very close indeed. That would be instant disqualification for qualifying if you came through there at the speed that Povey did in real race conditions, of course. The yellow flags would be out, the double wave yellows, and across the line comes Povey, and it's an improvement, but only by 0.04 of a second on the previous time. So it's not enough to even overhaul Major Castman, and while Poros has done a fantastic time in the Ferrari, 1:17.132, so just 0.02 ahead of what Castman was able to produce last time out.
Yeah, pretty quick one, and but not a lot of time found for Povey. Apologies for putting stuff over the screen. We're trying to get Hugh Sam in. Where is he?
Oh dear, and that's a Red Bull going off. That being Luke, I believe. Yeah, Luke decided to have a little bit of a spinneroonie, and that's not going to help on their timed lap. So that's going to be curtains on that particular attempt for them. We've got yellows in the third sector for a slow-moving Alfa Romeo. So once that one is then out of harm's way, we will have an idea of how much time is left in this session. But as it is then round, the final turn goes Habs van Nick, and across the line they go, and it is an improvement, but again a very, very small improvement, 0.07 of a second that time. So we're not seeing massive improvements on the second runs here.
Not yet, and maybe just either people turned in very good first runs, or it doesn't look like the track condition is changing much. Of course, we do get that kind of increase in grip in the last 5 minutes of the session, so I do believe that Fraser is now starting a timed lap. It wasn't the Mercedes that we saw was Daredevil following Elliott around. It wasn't Fraser. So this is the man trying to improve on his provisional pole time. We'll see where he gets. We're about to come up to the first sector split. We'll see, is he going to extend that mark? But yeah, we're going Wild Poros, a very good lap, and only a couple hundredths of improvement through the first sector for Fraser even.
Couple of hundredths though, it's still mighty impressive for a time that is nearly half a second quicker than the next best car. And so Fraser then, in a series of course where the car performance levels are set to equal, they are technically spec cars. Now you can have your arguments as to just how much the difference between the car models then matters, because of course they don't have the same wheelbase, so there are subtle differences in the characteristics of the handling. But as we go through the reprofiled section then, through the second sector, and now into the third for Fraser, on board with the Mercedes driver, sporting that almost mirror Sebastian Vettel head, black base instead of white, then with the German flag colours striped across it. And as we go through the final turn, just a bit too much for Fraser then, kicking the boot out, and that then means into the pits they go.
I think that was intentional. He was unhappy with the lap,
Really?
and he just decided to drift it into the pit lane, some swag style. Castleman does improve, gets down into the 16.845, so he's edged a little bit closer to Fraser's ultimate lap time as he finished up that lap. As Fraser was drifting his way through, where is, I believe, Luke next to cross the line. And he's going to find some time as well.
Absolutely. Now, for those who may be unfamiliar with what's been going on in the Division 1 standings and everything, you might notice that one of our championship protagonists is not in this race. And we're not talking about Clem, who we've already mentioned on the broadcast, of course, but that being Nemesis. Turns out that through a penalty incident or a steward's investigation, they were so happy that they didn't get penalised for something that they decided to quit the league. Not sure why. but there we go. So that means that they've left the server indeed as well. So all the best to them and whatever it is they decide to go on to do next. But yeah, as it stands, it means that we're now down to Castleman versus Povey at this stage in the season. Though, of course, if Fraser becomes a bit more of a full-time driver, it could be that they have a late championship charge and try and go for the first ever cross-play championship in the FRS. Who knows?
Yeah, and that does have some knock-on implications of the Constructors' Championship as well. We were looking at, kind of that power team of Williams up against the very strong Red Bull combination, and now it's kind of all MJ Povey, the MJ Povey show in Williams. Now, as a Williams driver myself, I'm quite looking forward to seeing how myself and Dog will continue to do down in Div 2. Hopefully we can keep the team's championship running and pick up at least one Constructors, but we'll just have to see if MJ Povey can score well enough to hold off Castleman in the Drivers' Championship. It's only 1 point between them so far.
Certainly is. Things very, very tight in that Drivers' Championship, as you say. And, well, it's going to be one of these things where maybe the introduction of maybe a resurgent Wild Poros or when Clem comes back, of course, them getting into the mix again. And then if, as I say, Fraser and Luke end up being more stalwarts in the rest of this season, then it could be that we're in for a cracker as we get into the middle part of this season. So across the line will come Queasy Pluso, then jump up to P10. So now then, we focus our attention on what we're seeing on the broadcast, that being Elliott in P7. And they're coming through the last couple of corners now. 1.5 seconds, though, off of their personal best.
Yeah, they've
so
abandoned this lap. They've got the light flashing, so they are quite done with this particular lap. So we'll go back to False Tax, who I believe is the only one on an actual flying lap. Squeezy just finished, I believe, 2 laps.
Absolutely. And False Tax, well,
commentators cursed.
Exactly, yep. Straight round as we look at all that. But False Tax, then, a driver who's... well, I was going to say has had a bit of racing experience today because they were taking part in a little event with Williams Esports a bit earlier on. And, well, they've done about as well there in turn number 2 as they did in that, which is a bit unfair of me to say. They got through to the final race, I suppose. But yeah, so a bit of a spinneroony there for them. But, hopefully in the remaining couple of minutes they can get those tyres cooled down, recharge the battery, and then go for another second attempt at a timed lap. Either way, they're not going to put a time in this time because this lap has been invalidated. So now then we focus on the McLarens, and they are very close together as around for a spin again goes False Tax. And onto the start-finish straight goes Dante. And they currently have 18.4 on the board, so definitely loads of room to improve. And as they go down in towards turn number 1, then making use of that curb on the outside and then getting the car tucked into the apex in both 1 and 2. Small bit of a snap of oversteer, though, on the exit of 2 and into the entry of 3. And a little bit wide of the apex in 3 as well. That's all going to have a knock-on effect, and it does mean they are 0.5 down on their personal best. So they need to really dig deep in this second and third sector here to try and find more time. Now, as they get the car hooked up and through turn number 4, then through 5 and up towards 6, and then chucking the car in, then you're going to want to then try and ride over the curb as much as possible in 7, and then here comes 8, a fearsome corner where you're going to have to lift ever so slightly there. No dropping down the gears for them though, so now down into number 9. And so 9 we go then, the reprofiled corner, a little bit of an oversteering moment again for them on exit of that turn. And now then, as they start to tuck the car in this third and final sector then, so turn 10, 11, 12, 16, 15, 16 to come, because there's 16 corners somehow on the circuit, and I think I've missed 1 or 2 of them somewhere.
Well, turn 10's the reprofiled long left-hander. Turn 9's that high speed at the top of the hill. Let's see if they find the time in the final sector. They do, 18.3. They're kind of what could have been, I think, for a lot of that lap.
Yeah, 1.4 tenths improvement. So, yeah, absolutely very much a what might have been. And Ruprath now going very slow in the final chicane. I don't know whether they have blocked one of the Alpines just behind them there in doing so. I certainly hope not for their sake. Which Alpine was that? It was F50 was right behind them, but F50 also on an outlap, so it's on F50 therefore having followed so closely to the Haas. And as they go to turn number 1, then F50 is really feeling that dirty air, pushing
coming
the
across
front
the line.
end of the car
Povey
away.
improves to a 16.9, but it's not going to get him up near pole position. Who's next across the line? Fraser not going to improve this time through. And Castleman facing the wrong way. Oh! Big crash.
Oh dear,
it looks like
what has happened there?
He might be he's just spun out, and I think he might have been a little beached on the the curbing a little bit. And no, he might have been in the track. It was hard to tell from that onboard. And false tax, kind of unsighted, gets right into him, and it's disqualified from the session. So that's going to cost quite a few people probably their last runs, though.
I would imagine so. I mean, there was a Williams or an Alpine that managed to get through somehow in the carnage of all that. I think it may have been Cryptic, but Cryptic is going so slowly through the third and final sector and into the pits now. It's not going to be them. So we're watching at the moment the Mercedes of Daredevil going through the second sector now, the beginning of the second sector, tucking the car in and down into the apex of that corner, driving out an exit all the way to the curb, which is nice. There's a good bit of car control there. As they come through then, up the hill through 8 and then up towards 9. There we go. We can get it right eventually here, Sean. Then over the top of 9 we go and down the way, but I've noticed that they only have 1% ERS remaining and they're now out of battery. So whatever they're attempting to do... Oh, they've already got checkered flag next to them. Silly me. I've been commentating on the AI doing that. Never mind.
Gotta love it. I mean, checker flag has been out. Everybody's basically done. I think we're doing, since there was a mid-quality session join in, I think we're going to do a quick lobby remake just to make sure everything is all Gucci. Because that sometime can cause a little bit of desync. But as it stands, Fraser in his return, top of the field.
Absolutely, a 116.692 versus a 116.845, so around about 1.5 tenths in it between them and Major Castleman. Certainly a much closer gap than what we maybe thought would be the case at the start of the session when Fraser first posted that time, but still a very good effort from the rest of the field regardless. So there we go then, confirmation of your qualifying order in part, because of course there is that lingering question as to whether or not false tax might have that disqualification from qualifying rescinded. Because, of course...
I'm going to take a look and just record their time and see what their best lap time was. 17.7.
17.7. So 17.7
7.11
would put them in 10th at this stage. So if they're allowed their position back, it would be 10th place. So it would be an all-Haas 10th and 11th.
Yep, and I'm just grabbing some nice screenshots of the race director. Just if the lobby remake is going forward. And... just kind of give us a nice little hold screen and chill out for a moment while we figure out what is going on. Keep an eye out in case we go directly into the race. But I think we should have a remake of the lobby going. In theory, of course. Pretty cool. I like it. Let's get a nice little shot of that so y'all can see it. Yeah. It's very
this is what we like to see.
Very interesting choice.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to quit to the main menu now.
Looks like a lot of people have had a freeze. I think we may have. I guess I think we're just going to have a lobby remake regardless. I'm asking. Let me see. I there's a countdown timer going now, so we'll see what that gives us. No. Yeah.
let's just wait and see as to what's going on here then.
Yeah, there
And,
is
we
a
will
formation lap going on.
There's a formation. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think
see what happens.
it does look like we are getting the lobby set. So, apologies for the delay.
yeah.
Gotta love, yeah, there's the migrating host. So, we'll pull it aside and everybody out. Yeah. All right. I'm going to relay the screenshots of the grid to the Discord. Nope, we are live. So we can keep these lovely people company. I think we're doing a fantastic job. It'd be nice to see them coming around. I mean, there's been a lot of good words from Mr. James Vowles about bringing his knowledge over. That, you know, he went in and said, I've looked at, looking at the way that both Mercedes and Williams have operated, and they're very different. So I think he's got some identification of things that will help improve that Williams team. Of course, Alex Albon drove really well last season. We should continue to improve, and then we'll see how Logan Sargent does. American driver, quite excited to see that. Who should have gotten more of a shot, honestly. No, of course not. I mean, definitely got to. They've got to do something. And eventually, they are still a rookie, so I don't think even they need to necessarily be beating Albon. But if they have a good showing against Albon this season, because Albon is a pretty decent driver, and he spent time in a Red Bull, and as we all know after the fact, was several development steps behind the other Red Bull car. So his time at Red Bull, much like Pierre Gasly's, was unfortunate the way it went. But I mean, we saw what Albon could do now that he's dyeing his hair all fun colors and scoring points in Williams's. Well, it'll be interesting. I think AlphaTauri on one hand has probably the shortest driver lineup on the entire grid between De Vries and Tsunoda, who I'm hoping Tsunoda can make a bit of a jump. He's shown those flashes in those moments, but I also think that, the AlphaTauri last year was a bit of a dog of a car. Pierre Gasly used his knowledge and experience to drive that well, but De Vries, as you say, one of the most experienced rookies to come in. I mean, spent all that time in Formula E and has been a test and reserve driver for years, and it's great to see him finally get that shot in an F1 seat. And I think if AlphaTauri can put together a decent car, we should see an AlphaTauri team that can score a decent number of points, should be in that kind of step ahead of the Haas-Williams group instead of fighting with them like we saw last season. It's a tough choice. I mean, obviously, starting with a car that's a higher up the grid, a la Mercedes, is great, as opposed to like a Haas that's a tricky car, but you've got some putting it together to do. I think the trouble that Mercedes is going to have this season, and why it's tough for them, is much like last season. I think we're seeing a correlation issue between what they're seeing in wind tunnel and CFD and what they're bringing to the track. Just like last season's testing, they were kind of off the pace in it and trying to figure out the car. And then, of course, day 2 of testing, you have Toto Wolff saying, I have no idea why there's this huge loss of front downforce after the second section. And I think that just Mercedes still, they figured the car out a bit towards the end of last season, but I think they did a whole lot of work in wind tunnel CFD, and when they finally got it to the track, stuff didn't add up this season. We do. I sent you an invite a minute ago. Let me send you another one. We've got just about everybody in. We should be underway shortly. I think we just need to... I think Crusoe's just trolling a bit. Yeah, it was looking like it was pretty dry. I'm just trying to find if I can see that they've got the grid set. They may be leaving that just to goof with people while they get the grid set up. Because, you know, they finally got everybody invited in, and now that everybody's in, they can finally start setting the grid order based on the qualifying screenshots. So, I'm sure, knowing Crusoe, they're just leaving it on the weather. It's a little bit of a goof while they get stuff set in, but we don't need any more pain in Spain, I would say. There we go. Countdown started. The weather is corrected. Sending that last message to Division 1 that they hopefully set their setups and strategies and then wait for others to be ready. You know, it worked in Division 2 because we're the superior division. Oh my god, Dan, I forgot to mention, we were talking about last week. I got a win. Finally. I won last week. No, or not last week, week before at Imola. A real win. Yeah, I won in Imola.
Seconds of airtime to talk through all the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings of such a thing. I also want to watch that now to make sure that I have the full picture. So we will save that for another day, maybe for a certain podcast that may or may not need recording in the next day or two. Who knows? But yes, we'll get ready to go. Again, we have our T-posing mechanics, which is very nice. And we'll wait for these drivers to get themselves ready and into the lobby then.
Yeah, and looks like we'll be ready to go in just a little bit. So we get to take a look at this nice, lovely Spain pit lane, which rhymed, and I didn't even think about it at the moment.
You're a poet and you didn't even know it.
Didn't even. I'm a poet and I wasn't even aware. Thank you for everybody who's still viewing and watching as we fight through the thing and the brutality of the trouble of lobby stuff. But we'll be ready to rock and roll in just a minute. and we'll get ready to go under racing conditions. So it's a dry session. There's the countdown timer. So we will see what kind of tire strategies we go through. I mean, just like everywhere else, it's probably going to be mediums and hards that we'll see. The softs only go about 10 laps in this race, so it's what, a 33 lap race this time around?
I believe you're correct, but I will cheekily not commit to agreeing or disagreeing with you until the lap counter is on our screen, because I'm a savvy and attentive host like that. Allegedly. So, we've got the drivers on the grid then, and away we go for the formation lap. It's a familiar sight. Fraser leads the field away, with Major Castleman alongside, then MJ Povey, our two championship protagonists in second and third, with then a resurgent Wild Poros behind, then Luke, Mako, Habs Van Nick, Elliott, F50, Ruprath, Queasy Pluto, iAlfie W, Daredevil, Bonhomie, Dante, Seiso, Cruzo, Chicken Sucker, Cryptic, and False Tax. So there we are then. Cruzo, in his dictatorial ways, has elected not to give False Tax, rather, 10th place. If anything, it gives Cruzo that extra position, I suppose, and the clean side of the grid. So it's a fairly easy decision for the coordinator in the end, I would imagine. At me if you believe he is badmin. Don't actually do that. Yes, so away we go then. And on this formation lap, they're going to be getting these tyres up to temperature. Of course, as you can see on Fraser's car, for instance, they have the hard tyres on. So things are looking like they're going to want to go as deep as they can in this race before we then go onto some mediums or possibly those softs at the end if they're able to really stretch out the hards, but I doubt it. And then behind them, it's similar case for the other top two in the championship, or for the top two in the championship, I should say, Castman and Povey. And then Wild Poros, the first to deviate from that strategy with mediums on their Ferrari. Then Luke in the Red Bull, also on hards. Then we have three drivers on the mediums, that being Mako, Habs Van Nick, and then Elliott. And then hards all the way from F50 down to Bonhomie. Then three sets of mediums, that being Dante, Seiso, and Cruzo. And then Chicken Sucker, Cryptic on the hards, and False Tax on mediums. But crucially, no drivers electing to go on the softs.
And that's a slick tire warming strategy from Wild Poros of 360, and pulls into his grid box, I believe, on his marks.
Yeah, he does. Good job from them, and not such a good job from Major Castleman. They have elected to give themselves about something about...
It's about a meter or so.
About a meter less than what they could. Cruzo and Ruprath also being caught out by the manual grid placement. But now, with False Tax slotting into their grid slot, we are moments away from the start of this race. So then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 red lights. Lights out, and it's a go, 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 and Fraser immediately moving to the middle of the circuit, over to the right-hand side, trying to cover off as much as they possibly can from Castleman and Povey behind, but it's the battle between those two. Povey has snuck up alongside and past Major Castleman, but into turn one they go. Contact between the two cars, side by side, wheel to wheel, and that means then that ultimately Major Castleman gets back in front, while Poros is still in fourth. Queasy is off further back, so is Alfie further down. They have also made contact. The two Alphas were next to each other on the grid, so it might be that teammates have come together there and ended up causing some problems. And once they get going again, though, it means that we do have a first corner with no major safety car. Into turn 4 they went, and Mako and Dante coming together. And Chicken Sucker out of the race. Dear oh dear, they have lost the car in a very strange place. And, well, that is not something that you would expect at all. Dante then down to 17th after that wheel-to-wheel contact there with Mako. Mako either just cutting off the door a bit too much for the McLaren driver, or the McLaren ending up just going a bit too deep into that corner and not ultimately giving the space to the other car. But as it is then, Fraser just ahead of Major Castleman. The gap, half a second between them under this virtual safety car. Hopefully it does not graduate to a full safety car, because then we can get racing much, much sooner. And
looks like the car is cleared, so we're just waiting for it to go back. And there's the green flag once again.
There we go then. So Fraser picks up the throttle, tries to get as good a drive out the final turn as they can. They've been able to extend a few tenths on Major Castleman there. I think Castleman getting a bit caught out. They were on the sort of entry into the final couple of corners in the chicane there. And as they come across the line then, that gap has stabilized slightly, so Castleman potentially going for a lower drag setup than Fraser. That's an achievement in and of itself. Fraser famous for setting these low drag setups, which is very difficult for cars to get close and past them. And as we continue to watch then, Cryptic here in 12th place, trying to find their way past Daredevil at this stage, side by side with the Mercedes down in towards turn number 4, and they get that Alpine past. Great move there, late on the brakes, nice and clean, and now they come back to the racing line and manage to keep that car ahead. Now they've got Alfie just in front, who's then got the all-valuable single point for 10th place at the moment on lock. And the Alpine is going to be hoping that they can find their way past there and get themselves sorted. But for the hard tyre runners, this is a good start. It means we don't have a safety car that forces them off of that tyre if they were to go into the pits. And for the medium tyre runners, in a similar sense, the same thing. It means they can continue with their strategy, and we were barely interrupted, only for a few corners whilst that car was being cleared.
Yeah, Cryptic's going to be one to keep an eye out for on this race. He is absolutely rapid when he can keep the car pointing in the right direction. He's had trouble with some of the consistency, but a couple invalidated laps in qualifying, and you can see just how much pressure he is putting on Alfie.
Oh, big spin! Big spin for Luke. Sorry to interrupt you there, Sean. But it was big spin for Luke out of the final turn, and just the absolute worst place that they could lose it, because from where they were, they've then had to wait for the entire field to go past them now. They're down to 19th position, over 5 seconds off the back, or will be in a second, over 5 seconds off the back of the next car. Never mind the midfield where they had been battling previously.
Looks like Cruzo's around through turn 2 as well. Cryptic did make that position on Alfie already, so now he's hunting down his Alpine teammate F50 ahead. But drivers really struggling with rear-end grip on these heavier fuel loads, just kind of catching them out, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, and particularly in those problem areas that we've seen throughout this game's life cycle. Places like turn 3 is a particular problem area. We can see at the front of the field now, though, Fraser has a car in their DRS. That's not something that happens too often in this in a race where Fraser is taking part, certainly in this game at least. And so there's sort of two battles forming really at the head of this field. One between Fraser and Castleman, one between Povey and Poros. And then a little bit further back is then Elliott a little bit on their own, unless they make a mistake, in which case then Mako will be able to pounce on them. Through the final turn then goes the Mercedes and the Red Bull. Is it 2021 all over again? And down the start-finish straight they go then. Big, long DRS straight here then. The longest run down towards turn 1, of course, of any circuit on the calendar. And now, as they make their way down towards turn 1, DRS open the whole time. Castleman has been able to get within 2/10 of Fraser there down that start-finish straight. But now through the corners, they're going to have to tuck in and try and stay as close as they possibly can throughout the rest of this lap. And once they're able to get that sorted, they then might be able to have a second go down the start-finish straight there. But they need to make sure they come out that final turn a bit closer than they did last time around.
Cryptic has made the move past F50 and is now in the DRS of Habs fan Nick just ahead. So Cryptic continuing to move forward over the course of this race already. If he can clear Habs fan Nick on the medium tires, that's going to be very tough for Nick to fight back on. And then Cryptic's going to have a set of 4, has a set of 4 drivers on the mediums ahead. Now, as these laps tick away, his car will get better and better on those tires. And look at how close following through that high-speed right-hander all over the gearbox of Nick. Is he going to try and go for a move? It looks like he's going to just sit there in turn 10, but he is really putting the pressure on the Ferrari.
Or too much pressure, perhaps. Bit of an oversteering moment there when they were right tucked up behind the Ferrari with barely a cigarette paper between them. And as they start to go through the last couple of corners then, or last sector I should say, it's very close indeed between these drivers. I think that on the DRS straight here, unless Nick happens to have a very low drag setup, we could be seeing another overtake for Cryptic. Now this just demonstrates that Spain, one of those circuits where the FRS proves it is not a circuit that is difficult to overtake at. We've had some of our best ever races here. Remember Season 3 PC Division 1 as up the inside in turn number 1, a very late move all of a sudden from Cryptic, and they try and make it happen. Doesn't end up working for them there, but they might have just been able to offset and upset Habs van Neck enough. We're now on the run towards turn number 4. We've seen them do it once. Will they do it again? No, not this time, but now on the run towards turn number 5. This one then is for all the marbles. And if they can get it done here, no, they can't. They tuck in behind once again. It might be that into turn 10, that is where they decide to make their lunge. And as we watch him now, going back up this hill then, just up the road, we can see that battle has gotten closer between Elliott and Mako. In fact, so close that the positions have swapped. Mako in the Aston Martin up to 5th place now, and Elliott in the AlphaTauri down, and Elliott making a mistake up ahead, you can see as well, and they're well off the circuit. That means they've lost huge amounts of time, and that means that that's going to make life a lot easier. And MJ Povey versus Wild Poros, the move has been made. Poros in the 3rd sector, in a part of the circuit you would never normally think would be an overtaking spot, has somehow made that work on MJ Povey. I didn't see that. I don't think we saw that in the broadcast
no,
either.
I didn't think there was anything, but now has he done it too early? Because he's given now the DRS to Povey down the pit straight. But I think Povey's a little too far back. Cryptic closing up, and the one thing with Elliott's mistake, though, is it's given Habs fan Nick some DRS to help defend with.
Absolutely, yeah. Very, very interesting, very tricky indeed. And Nick then has been able to have a stay of execution there from the Alpine behind. The Alpine looks very, very racy and looking in a competitive place. It's just, as you say, that invalidation, those invalidations rather in qualifying have then really been what have hurt them. We've got a Haas moving very, very slowly on the 2nd DRS straight, but back up to speed now. Green flags back in that part of the circuit once again. It's good to see. And that then would be, I would assume, false tax, as they are way off the back of Cruiser, who's down in 2nd last place of the cars still running. And then meanwhile, we've got still these battles going on all over the shop. We've got Major Castman still tucked right in behind Fraser. And the difference in terms of the pace there between these guys is not far at all. We've got that Alfa Romeo, that Haas rather, round in the 3rd sector. So they've now got to wait for a gap. I think they're going to take it after the Aston goes through, maybe not. Oh dear, it's just the place you do not want to be.
Castleman's as close as he's been over the course of this race, less than 2/10, and now Fraser having to try and break the slipstream. And Castleman, though, as we've seen, burning a lot of battery, that rear light flashing, he's taken over the lead, but has Fraser managed the battery enough now to take that position right back?
That's one that we will wait and see on. False Tax has picked up 2 different penalties within just a few corners there. It's at insult to injury as far as those spins are concerned. So Major Castleman then takes the lead of the Spanish Grand Prix and gets themselves past Fraser. And so could this be then that we see a reverse of fortunes now? Now will Fraser just tuck in behind, wait for the opportunity to come, and then get themselves past the Red Bull driver? It could be something that ends up happening. We'll wait and see. But Fraser is a wily old fox. They know exactly what to do and how to race, especially in this game. And they're still sticking in there. Very, very close. Less than half a second initially as they first came onto this straight here. But then it didn't look as though the DRS flap was open on that Mercedes car.
It was showing as open. Did you get a better angle of that? It was showing as open on my side. I do think, though, you're on to something, that Fraser might be running a lower downforce setup, because Castleman was able to make a fair bit of time in the high-speed right-hander of turn 9, entering that DRS zone. It went from about 0.4 to 5.5. So I think that there's just a little bit more downforce and grip in that Red Bull, but now we'll see that straight-line speed that Fraser expects from Mercedes. I mean, just look at the time coming down. He might be just a little far back. He has a little look, a little bit of a think, but doesn't quite go for it. MJ Povey's been hanging on to the back of Wild Poros as well. Maybe those hard tires starting to come around. And that battle still going, I think between Cryptic and Habs fan Nick side by side into turn 1. And once again, Cryptic just kind of having to back out, not able to get full enough alongside. He's having a little, make the smart move. He's not entitled to the space, and he's actually backing out of a move.
Absolutely.
Which is a surprise for FRS in some cases.
I was going to say, it's. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to encourage this behaviour as much as possible, but yeah, a little bit out of character for the FRS. And again, over the top of turn 9, Fraser loses time, and all the way down that 2nd DRS straight. I can see the DRS flap is open that time. They definitely do lose time. So yeah, I think that you and I are both absolutely right there, and that Fraser is running that lower downforce setup, which is keeping them in touch on the straights, but then in the corners they just seem to be struggling that bit more, particularly in this final sector here, where things then stay pretty much as they are or grow, where for the majority of the lap it doesn't look as though much time is lost through many of the corners. Fraser then gets the DRS open once again, and down the start-finish straight we go then, closing in on their target, but it looks as though Castleman is able to hold them off for the time being. They're able to keep that Red Bull in front. I think that they are just managing to keep it there, which is great. This is great racing that we're seeing between these drivers. Meanwhile, for MJ Povey, they are tucked right up the chuff of the Ferrari there, while Poros is very, very calm under fire here, it seems. But something which has become fairly emblematic of the seasons being had by these drivers so far, and you've already touched on it with Castleman, but for both Castleman and Povey, red lights flashing aplenty on the back of their cars. But then compare them to the cars that they're fighting. I've not seen Fraser or Wild Poros's cars with a flashing light once.
No, and you would expect Wild Poros to have a little bit of pace in hand, obviously, with the tire differential, but Fraser's, does seem to be managing his battery a little better. Fraser stayed closer through turn 9 than he has before, so maybe that's going to set him up with a chance to re-overtake down the pit straight. We'll see how he does through the final sector. That train that Elliott's kind of heading, of Habs Van Nick, Cryptic, and F50 still kind of as they were so far. I think Cryptic had the speed to get Habs Van Nick if he didn't have the DRS help, but now that Nick has some help with the DRS, I think it's going to be tough for Cryptic to get by. But Fraser, again, losing about 0.2 out of that final corner immediately. Maybe a little bit of a mistake because he's dropped a ton. He was within 0.3 coming into the final chicane.
Absolutely. So down into turn number 1 then. And once again, it's close, but not close enough. And for the battle further down the order, Habs Van Nick versus Cryptic and Elliott. Nick is getting closer and closer to Elliott, but I don't think it's going to be close enough. So I tell you what, I may have cursed this race here. With these cars that are allegedly better at following one another, we're having less overtakes than what we've seen in Season 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, they seem to not quite get the run. Of course, DRS trains are always just the worst. If you get stuck in a DRS train, there's not a whole lot of help. You could be a good couple tenths quicker than the car ahead, but if they're getting the help from DRS, although it looks like Nick now putting some pressure on Elliott. All two of these drivers on the medium tire, Cryptic and F50 on the hard tires. So even if the hard tires are getting quicker than the mediums, if Cryptic can't get through, he can't make use of those hard tires. We are starting to get a little closer towards those medium tire pit windows. I think it's around lap 15 or 16. You should see those on the mediums dive into the pit lane.
Absolutely, yeah. Just wanted to touch on that F50 there, just having a bit of a mistake through 9. They nearly stuffed it in the wall on the inside, but managed to gather the car back up again. But it means they've lost DRS to this train in front. That then means there's less pressure on Cryptic, which means they can focus more of their efforts in moving forwards. And it looks like it might happen this time, because out the final turn, they are as close as they have been all race long. And now then, they've got DRS open, so does Habs Van Nick. They're trying to hang on to the back of Elliott here, but the Alpine looks like it's just closing in more and more and more. They go to the inside. Is this going to work? Down into turn 1. They've got to be brave on the brakes. Late 2. And through turn number 2 they go. They're trying to hang it around the outside, through the inside in turn number 3. Side by side on the run now, down towards turn number 4. And it is side by side. You cannot choose between them, but then Nick just manages to drive it all the way around the outside. And into 4 they go. And Habs Van Nick holds on to P7 in the Ferrari.
Wow, you saw Cryptic burning a lot of battery. That red light started flashing midway through turn 2, and then Nick just had enough traction to hang around the outside and then carry that momentum down to turn 4 to make that overtake stick. There's a decent battle going between Luke and Dante down the field. Two pretty experienced drivers that are in positions you wouldn't really expect them to be in, but taking a look up and down the timing sheets, Cryptic is getting very close to Nick once again, and look at just almost scraping the front wing, literally pushing Nick through. There's some bump drafting going on.
This is what we love to see. We love to see close, fair racing in the FRS. And this is absolutely what we like. A big oversteer moment for Cryptic. All that hard work of getting so close, you could practically smell the gearbox of the Ferrari in front. And it all comes to naught. Instead, they have to simply just tuck back in again and try and get closer again on this lap. Meanwhile, up towards the front of our field, Fraser's gotten that gap down now to 0.3 of a second. But again, this is unusual. This is not what we're used to seeing. Fraser chasing somebody else and struggling to get past them. Absolutely not what we expect. And then for Povey, you would expect that those mediums would be not as quick as the hards at this point on Wild Poros's car, but Poros is still hanging on in there despite that and keeping ahead of the Williams.
Yeah, still just kind of doing enough, and it may be another kind of setup differential, whereas those mediums fall off. They're not as good in the corners, but the car's built good enough for straight line. It makes it very tough to overtake. We'll see if Fraser can navigate this final sector and stay close to Castleman. It's been typically where he's lost most of the ground. We have seen the medium tires starting to fall off a bit from Elliott's car. Just you see how close that Cryptic and even how quickly F50 caught back up to that train. I think those medium tires are starting to lose their life.
Yeah, you have to wonder what those medium tire runners would be able to do if they were in a position where they could just, exploit them a bit more. Sorry, the hard tire runners, if they could exploit them more in clean air.
Oh, yellow flags, and that's Cryptic around.
Oh no, Cryptic, why, oh why, oh why? There's that consistency you were talking about and just how it's come to bite them after just getting maybe a bit frustrated behind the car in front, trying to make something happen. It's then all come to naught for them, and that's then the end of their potential run in the points here, because it's been very, very competitive in that sort of mid part of the field. And, that combined with DRS trains, it looks like they may really struggle now to get themselves back up the order. Meanwhile, Nick has maybe taken this as an opportunity to really go into attack mode rather than driving on their mirrors, as they're now only 3/10 off the back of Elliott here. Very close between those two, as down the second DRS straight, we're watching there with Fraser and Major Castleman. There's still just that separation of about 4/10 or so headed into the third sector, which again seems to be as much as what Castleman needs, because then the latent benefits of their setup and the extra downforce to give them that extra grip in the corners means that they can then just hang on that bit longer and then drive away through the final couple of turns. And look at that, now over 7.5/10. As they initially make the drive out of the final turn, onto the main straight they go, and Fraser's able to start reclaiming bits of that time, but not by much.
He's going to have to be within 4/10 or so getting onto the pit straight in order to make a move. I mean, he's able to chew up a good 3/10, but it's just not quite enough. We'll take a look at... Oh, MJ Povey has actually gotten past Wild Poros. No, they're side by side. He's not gotten past yet.
Side. Wow, look at this then, the Ferrari versus the Williams. It's almost like that battle with the Alpine versus the Ferrari earlier on, except this time I don't think Povey's going to back out. They don't back out. Into turn 4 they go, side by side. The Ferrari's got that higher line. It's sometimes easier to hang it all the way around the outside. Now down into turn number 5 they go, and the Ferrari's got the inside. Will they now be able to hang Povey out around the outside? Yes, they do, but Povey on traction, then able to get that Williams pass. Finally back up into the podium place, and this time on the hard tires. But again, they burned a lot of ERS in getting there. Flashing red light on the back of that Williams, and no DRS for them down this back straight. That's instead going to go to Poros. If Poros can keep within touching distance, and then they go on to the start-finish straight once again, then it could be that Poros is able to get themselves back past, it seems here, because they don't have that flashing red light. Even now in the third sector, it's still flashing on Povey's car, so they are still less than 10% battery, and so it means they won't really have all that much to defend with into the start-finish straight. As they go through the final turn, then a bit of an oversteer moment for Povey as well. So that's then lost them time. That means that their gap is coming down even through the final corner. And look at this then. Wild Poros, pardon me, is now closing in, comes to the inside, gets that Ferrari alongside and then past, and down in towards turn number 1. They're back alongside and in front. Wild Poros back onto the podium, and MJ Povey must be seething at that.
Yeah, just that tiny mistake coming out of the final corner, and it cost them time the whole way down. There's a local yellow. It looked like a slow-moving Mercedes of Daredevil going up at the front still. Fraser and Castleman, about 0.3 a second between the two of them, and Habshan Nick still kind of stuck behind Elliott, and F50 just kind of biding their time as well. They've driven very well so far in the Alpine. Pretty quiet race for them. And oh, there's a car off the circuit. I believe that is False Text just bailing out of the way in that one as some of the top drivers come through. But we'll see if Povey's going to make a move potentially into turn 10. Not quite there.
Not quite there, not this time. But Povey is definitely feeling racy now, it seems. And Fraser, meanwhile, just a little bit further up the road, is within 0.4 as they head into the final chicane. Can they maintain that gap, or will they lose time? Out the final corner, and it looks much better now for Fraser. They're now within half a second as they get onto the straight. Fraser with a new fastest lap of the race as well to boot. 1:20.4. They're closing in on the Red Bull. Closing. The Red Bull really moves to the outside. And now into turn number 1 they go. It's side by side for the race lead. Fraser trying to now get it up the inside in turn number 3, but Castleman takes a really wide entry into that corner. Gives them a big long line to then be able to get over. Contact between the two of them, and now into turn 4 they go. The gloves have come off. Fraser has found a playmate.
Poros is in the pit lane. Wild Poros came into the pit lane while that was going on. I saw Povey in third all of a second, but yeah, Poros has gone into the pits. So off those medium tires. Lap 16, he's come in. So has Seiso and Dante. So we're starting to see the medium tire runners getting off those tires. Cryptic now trying to make a move up past Daredevil. And Cryptic once again fighting through the field. Shows he's got the pace. Just like we said earlier, he needs to keep the car pointed in the right direction.
Absolutely. They're now trying to go all the way around the outside of Daredevil. Look at this then. This is an interesting move. If they can pull it off. No, not this time. The Mercedes manages to just get itself that little bit further ahead on the run down towards the twisty bits up the hill. And now through turn number 9, much, much better for Cryptic in terms of the, well, it was until a bit of an oversteering moment on the exit of the corner. Excuse me, exit of the corner. And then into turn 10 they go. Again, it looks like Cryptic's just got a lot more grip and a lot more confidence in the car, really. They then go trying to go for the up and under on the Mercedes.
Fraser's going for the move on Castleman at the front, down the pit straight. He stayed close enough, and this time he's gotten fully by, and now he just needs to not make a mistake and let Castleman get back into attacking position. But it looked like the door kind of closed last time by. I think that was probably a tiny bit of wheel rubbing and the lovely Cody's, when things touch, they stick together. I don't think it was anything particularly malicious from the door closing on Castleman. I think it's just one of those Cody's things. But looks like Mako has decided to come into the pit lane as well as Alfie. So medium tire runners still out on the field. Elliott and Habs fan Nick.
Absolutely. So they're going to continue on. Now 16 laps was getting into that danger territory of about as far into the race as those mediums could go, really. 18 laps was the prediction. And so if they get to 18 laps, then they're going to be looking at potential puncture territory. And of course, then all that then entails for that. Now, Fraser then is trying to really put some daylight between themselves and Castleman through this third sector here. You can see them really pushing. The attitude of the car then looking much different when they were following. And you can see that reflected in the lap time as well. They have been able to pull out that gap to 7/10 of a second.
Snap of oversteer there.
Through the final. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Big snap of a big snap. And this could be like what we saw earlier on with Cryptic. Not with Cryptic, sorry, with Povey. Fraser sets another fastest lap of the race, but they're going to lose time all the way down this straight here because Castleman, of course, got a good exit out at the final turn. Fraser did not, and so that means the gap comes down to 3/10, arguably much closer than it should have been.
Yeah, but you did see down the pit straight, you kind of saw Castleman staying out of the slipstream, not actually trying to, take that draft and maybe just trying to just build a little bit more ERS. And Habs fan Nick has finally come into the pit lane while Poros is going to re-emerge. He's in 8th at the moment, so starting to shuffle his way back up. Now the lead of the newer hard tires goes to Wild Poros. Everybody else ahead on the old 17-lap hard tires as strategy's starting to come around. We've only had the one VSC. It's been a pretty quiet race as far as strategy goes.
It certainly is. I'll tell you one driver who's not being quiet right now, though, is F50, who we're on board with because they have just set the fastest first sector of anybody in this race. And that was without the use of DRS as well. So could it be that this is the end of the tyre life as far as they're concerned, and they're going to try and get themselves into the pits at the end of this lap? They could take mediums all the way to the end. That is possible. It just means that they will be a bit of a sitting duck at the end if someone on hard tyres or younger mediums comes across them. So as they go through the next few corners then, Fraser has gone into the pits. So behind Castleman, they go for the undercut over their rival. And then let's wait and see then what F50 does here. Onto mediums, as you would expect for Fraser at this stage in the Grand Prix. And F50 does not come into the pits this time. So instead, they continue on, and they will get themselves and false taxes disqualified from the session for getting too many penalties, as a fastest lap has been set by Wild Poros, and then by F50, or rather F50 and then by Wild Poros.
F50 on the gearbox of a Fraser who's coming out on some pretty cold medium tires.
Yeah, this could potentially get spicy here. If they're able to get by Fraser, that could massively impede them on their outlap. But by the end of this first sector here, I think that is pretty much all done for Fraser. They have got those tyres now to enough of a temperature where they can stay ahead. They won't quite be fully up to temperature, of course, but they will be able to stay ahead of F50 at this stage. There you go. They really launch off return number 5 and start to disappear off into the distance, and then F50 starting to have a bit more of a leery time there on those tyres. I think definitely the end of this lap is when they're going to want to get them off. So with all that being said and done, let's look at those runners who started on the mediums and then have gone over to the hards. So for Mako, they've been on those tyres for 2 laps. Habs fan Nick and Elliott just for 1 lap, and through that pit stop phase, Habs fan Nick has actually been able to overtake Elliott. Elliott now 3 and a bit tenths back from their rival earlier on in this race, and Castleman is in. Povey has elected to keep on going for another lap here. Interesting decision. Will Fraser come past their rival whilst they're in the pits? I suspect that they will. The undercut is quite powerful here around Spain, unless, of course, Castleman has had the mother of all in laps. And out they come then. It's going to be close into turn one, actually. Much closer than I thought it would be. Cold tyres versus warm, though, and it should be easy for Fraser.
Oh, big slide for
Castleman.
Castleman! It looks like he's kept it out of the
goes
barriers, but those cold tires just pushing to hold the position. A big slide.
Big slide and a dangerous potential. I don't want to call that, but that was a potentially dangerous rejoin. Daredevil nearly went into the back of Castleman there from how quickly they rejoined and came onto the racing line. Just ahead of them, it's Poros versus Daredevil, and Poros, of course, was able to stick reasonably close. Now, that was with a bit of a tyre advantage, but even then, when those mediums start to go off, they were able to keep those tyres going reasonably well. So expect Poros to be a bit of a threat later on for Castleman, even if they get past them relatively soon. And that means now it's Fraser versus Povey essentially out in the lead, but Povey is only 15.5 seconds ahead, so when they come into the pits, unless it happens to be under safety car, which it's not going to be because Povey is coming in now, then Fraser should very easily retake the lead of this race. What was looking to be an exciting race from start to finish as far as our lead battle was concerned, looks to all be over.
Well, Castleman's got some work to do. He's got Wild Porous just ahead. Granted, Castleman does have tire advantage, and you can already see the difference in grip. Here comes the Mercedes of Daredevil into the pits, and that may free Castleman to go for a move on Wild Porous. They're both going to have DRS, but wow, look at the overspeed that Castleman's got on Wild Porous. Probably burning a lot of that battery as he's done. But it does mean that Povey comes out in second place. So the championship battle, now Povey back on top. And Castleman has made their way through quite comfortably on Wild Porous. 1.3 seconds the margin. Now Povey has one lap fresher medium tires.
Now an angry Major Castleman is going to be driving as fast as they can to get by Povey whilst those tyres are cool. But as we saw with Fraser, those tyres should be up to temperature enough that they can drive out of this corner reasonably easily and get a good march on. Now, that being said, the gap has come down now between Povey and Castleman to now just about 6.5 tenths of a second. So things looking a bit more worse for wear as far as Povey's defense is concerned. They obviously won't have anyone try and overtake them now into this corner at the end of the second DRS straight, but as we get through the third section onto the main start-finish straight, that could be then where Povey is under big major threat here, as they weren't really able to get by Wild Porous very easily earlier on when they had DRS, so it could be that Povey is running a higher downforce setup, and that then could lead them to problems later on. Through the chicane they go then, and the Red Bull is stuck nice and close to Povey this whole time. Through the final turn they go. Fraser set to fastest lap just to flex a bit. 119.7. DRS open for the Red Bull, and
already
Povey.
That rear light flashing.
That rear light flashing already, as you say, yeah. And Povey, same for them too. Both drivers, as has become a bit of a theme between the two of them in this season, both using ERS very aggressively. They're not like a Fraser or a Wild Porous where they tend to hold it in reserve, hold it back for important moments or for in-laps or out-laps. Instead, they use it in combat constantly, and so you very frequently see those rear lights flashing red to indicate that they have less than 10% available.
Yeah, and around Spain here, if you drive an entire lap without using your overtake button, you'll regen about 9% of your battery per lap. So it's a decent recharge rate. It's not the best of the season, but it's not the worst of the season. But you see, their fingers are stuck to that overtake button, it would seem, throughout the course of this race. And we do have another battle that's starting to shape up between Queasy Pluto and Habs fan Nick. Of course, both of those drivers were in the running for the Drivers' Championship in the Xbox division last season up till the last race, that four-way fight. Ultimately, neither of them reached out on it, but Habs fan Nick came into a very good run of form at the end of that season and now is starting to show some pressure on Queasy, who kind of like Cryptic, quick but a little bit tough. Elliott has had a spin, it looks like, coming through that uphill section and has dropped behind his teammate Bonhomie.
How the mighty have fallen. Elliott running about where Habs fan Nick is at the moment in this race.
Having a look at Castleman there, almost got a nose alongside.
Oh, well, I mean, that must mean that the move happened. Castleman's gotten by MJ Povey.
Yes.
Well, we completely missed that.
Well, he was like 4 tenths back, or coming onto the pit straight. I didn't expect him to be quite close enough. My mistake. Apologies.
that's definitely on us. I mean, because I didn't even see it either on my own POV. So there you go. So Castleman ahead, but because both these drivers have completely burned through the ARS, there's not really much available left in the battery for them to try and pull out a lead over Povey to get more than a second ahead, which then means that, as you can see, onto the back DRS straight, or just the back straight generally, I suppose, they've got that DRS open to Povey. So that means that they'll be nice and close throughout this final sector, unless, of course, Castleman is able to produce a wonderful final sector as they did in that long, protracted battle with Fraser, of course, and gain a huge amount of time. And then if not, of course, then could be that we're on for round 2 here. Let's stick with this one this time, Sean, and we'll see how it all goes here. Through the final turn then comes Major Castleman leading MJ Povey, and that's then where they gain a huge amount of time. Through that final turn in particular in the chicane, that's where they gain masses of time. They've even got a purple final sector of the race there, has Major Castleman, so that means Povey not close enough this time.
Yeah, Castleman just seems to have a tremendous drive through the final chicane in that last corner. Setup aside, I think he's just got the line nailed and is confident in getting on the throttle out of those final couple of corners. Povey's able to grow, to get a little bit of time back, but you know, that gap is growing. Castleman is starting to make their way in.
If we look at Luke and P9, they've just got themselves by Daredevil. Sorry to interrupt you there, Sean, and I think that I saw that too late as well, because really the move was done by the time I shouted. Never mind by the time you would have had any chance to operate the keyboard. But there we go then. Luke on a recovery drive up into the points now, and on tyres that will be able to make it to the end of this race. So good for them. But yeah, back up to third and second place, and that battle's still going on then. But Povey a little bit further back on this lap versus the car in front of them. And that then means, to me at least, that if Povey makes another mistake in the final chicane and Castleman's able to nail it, then it could be that we end up seeing Povey dropping out of DRS range. Now, they might still get it down the start-finish straight here, even if they drop out of DRS through the final turn, because the detection line is further back there. But yeah, it's not looking good for Povey. I mean, this time, admittedly, it is actually about a tenth and a half closer onto the straight than they were before, but again, no ERS available for either driver means that they're just not able to then close up. They're relying entirely on DRS and setup differences, of which there seem to be fairly nil.
Yeah, they are starting to gradually pull Fraser in. The gap now hovering around 5 seconds as opposed to about 6.5 when they made their position swap. But, you know, we're on lap 25 of 33. It's amazing how quick the races go by when there's no safety cars. We're getting close to the end of this one. I don't think there's going to be enough time. Now, as it goes to between Castleman and Povey, if it finishes as they stand, coming into this race, Povey had a 1-point lead over Major Castleman. Castleman, 1 position ahead and holding the fastest lap point at the moment would mean that Castleman would take a 3-point advantage in the Drivers' Championship. Of course, we're still quite early. This is only round 4 of 13. But it's, you know, turning into a bit of a back-and-forth battle.
It certainly is. There's one driver I just want to point out who is probably begging and praying for a safety car in this race, and that is our current backmarker, Cruzo. Currently 24 laps, old medium tyres on that McLaren. So they are definitely in puncture territory. It's just whether or not it comes along for them before they inevitably have to go into the pits. So up at the head of this field, still Fraser leading the way by 4.9 seconds now ahead of Castleman, then Povey. Povey closing up down the start-finish straight there, but not close enough to make a move. Still trailing by about 2 or 3 tenths as they headed into turn 1. Then behind them, you've got Wild Boris, 7.7 seconds back. Very, very good first race back in charging form, really, for Wild Boris. We've seen flashes of pace from them this season, but this has been the first real testament to say, hey, I've actually got a really decent amount of pace in this car. So good to see from them. Mako also having a bit of an anonymous race, really, down in P5, but a solid drive. 10 easy points if they're able to hold on to this one in the championship, both for themselves and for Aston Martin, in both the constructors for Div 1, and then, of course, for the overall teams championship as well. And it's looking like something which is definitely possible for them here today. Again, just a very understated, very casual race where they've been able to keep themselves in good form and good performance. F50 then having a great first race in Division 1 in that Alpine. Up in P6 at the moment. Cryptic, of course, you would like to think would be up there with them, but they made that mistake earlier on, of course, which then sent them tumbling down the order. Queasy Pluto having a good recovery drive too, up into 17th, then Habs Van Neck in 8th at the moment. They might be able to fight their way back up a little bit later on when we get towards the last couple of laps, when those mediums might then start to become slower than the hards that they're on at the moment.
But then has gotten up into the points as Daredevil's had a bit of a spin coming through turn 10. It's a tricky traction zone, getting the right foot down there. And after running in the points, Mercedes now losing a car from the points. Of course, Fraser still in the lead of this race by a margin, but Luke is closing up on Haps Van Nick. If I can hit a 9 instead of a 6, we will see that battle.
You look at your keyboard upside down.
I think my whole brain is upside down.
So yeah, closest battle on circuit at the moment between these two. And Luke then, again, on a bit of a recovery drive, has been able to get themselves into this area behind Haps Van Nick. And again, it's going to be, for Nick, really, the make or break in this race is going to be how well these medium tyres hold on in these closing few laps. We've got about 6 laps to go now until the end, 6-7 laps. But then in that time, of course, it could be that those mediums start to drop off and then the hards take over as a much quicker tyre. But if they're being constantly harassed, then it doesn't look like there's really going to be all that opportunity for them. Crusoe has picked up a time penalty, and
they have finally pit as well.
Yeah, exactly. They've picked up also a set of soft tyres. So expect to see a fast lap attempt from Crusoe, and if they don't get it at least once before the end of this race, they don't necessarily still have to have it by the end, but if they don't get it at least once, I'm going to be very disappointed. And so, yeah, watching this battle then between Luke and Haps Van Nick, it's Ferrari versus Red Bull. A battle we saw for the first about quarter of the season last year. Hopefully it's something we can see for much longer in Formula 1 this year. And now then, DRS open on the Red Bull. Let's see what they're able to do versus Haps Van Nick down the start-finish straight. Massive overspeed on the Red Bull. They move to the inside, those grippier medium tyres. They then start to draw back towards the racing line slightly, and the move is done in towards turn number 1, then through turn 2, and 3 they come as well. And it's very much Red Bull 1, Ferrari 0 in that fight.
Yeah, and the Red Bull leading the Williams a little bit further up the field. Povey still hanging right in there with Castleman, although it's this final sector where he really kind of makes the difference with that extra grip. It's about 4/10 the gap. If Povey can have a good final sector and just hang right about, keep this gap about the same, they should be in attacking position down the pit straight. But you can see just as they go into these slow corners, that time interval increased so much.
See, taking a good hard look at it that time, it looks to me, now I might be getting this wrong, and we can always ask the drivers after the fact, but it looked to me as though what Povey is doing differently to Castleman in that third sector is all about the turn just before the final chicane and then the final chicane itself, because they're having a knock-on effect. What happens, and just keep an eye on them for this lap if we are watching them in the third sector, but Povey seems to take a lot more speed into the right-hander, which then means that they're further over to the left, so they can't then get as far over to the right for the entry to the chicane. That's what is ultimately, to me and my eyes, is the difference there. Castleman is taking less speed but more grip and less strain on the tyres through that right-hander, which then gets them further over to the right-hand side on entry to the chicane, which then means that they can have an easier time of slowing the car up and then getting the turn in right. That's what I think is going on there. Let's keep an eye and just see if it happens again.
Let's do one better. Let's ride on board with Povey and watch how Castleman goes through it ahead of him and what lines Povey takes. It is the closest battle on track still, so there's no reason to really jump it, well, aside from Bond moment. But let's see, where does Castleman place the car in this right-hander versus Povey? Similar line.
See there. Similar line, but Castleman hits the apex, and Povey misses it, and misses it by a good way as well, not even, touching it. So it's one of those things where I think that is where the difference is. Now, I think that ultimately there's maybe not too much difference between them in terms of the overall speed. It's just then how you're then setting up the exit of the chicane, really, which then, of course, in tandem leads then your entry, travel through, and exit of the final corner. That's then where the difference lies, because, of course, with having a much less of a raggedy entry into the right-hander, it then makes life much easier in terms of going through the chicane.
Down into turn 1, we have Queasy now making a move on F50. F50 forcing Queasy to the outside, side by side in the braking zone. Turn 1, he's going to switch to the inside for Queasy for turn 2. He's just got to kind of back out, though. Not confident to ride the curb. You can take quite a bit of that turn 2 curb if you straddle it in the right way. Otherwise, you can have the spins.
Yes. You'll be spat out as quickly as a piece of chewing gum in a... I've lost where that metaphor was going without making it very rude. So, let's see then. on this battle that we can see here for 2nd and 3rd. There's also that battle going on for 6th and 7th. And Castleman then, I think this time under much more threat. This looks much, much closer and much more competitive. Now, Povey again has a bit of oversteer, though, on the exit of the chicane. It looks like they're just not treating the car as well as Castleman is. Now, this time, they've got the DRS. They're both burning up their ERS until it's basically empty. And it looks as though Castleman is burning more of the ERS more quickly. It looks as though down that back straight, I mean, again, to my eye, it looks as though maybe Castleman's getting to the end of the battery, is having to let go of the overtake button, or is just hitting 0, because suddenly Povey gets a big launch, gains a good 2/10 or so all of a sudden at the very last
this
part
time
of the straight.
Queasy has the speed on F50. It'll be a pretty elementary move down into turn 1. Cryptic also, though, a little bit further back now, is going to be looking to get himself back into the points after a bit of a day in the wars here.
Absolutely, they're thinking about it. It's not going to happen this time, though. Ruprath has got that one covered, but Ruprath, they don't need to fight Ruprath too much, unless, of course, they want to be chasing up the road for potential more points, but that's going to be a task, given that Ruprath is 5.9 seconds behind Habs Van Nick, because, of course, Ruprath has a penalty, but up the inside they'll go anyway. Look at this, then, in turn number 4. The Alpine versus the Haas, and they managed to get themselves far enough ahead where they've got
but
to
late
get
on the
space.
brakes, Ruprath.
Yeah, Ruprath gets another one done there, leaves just about enough space there, and now they're going to make another run up the hill. Are they going to go side by side again? No, not this time. Ruprath tucks in behind, sensible decision, and with their tyres being of roughly similar age, though a bit more to the good for Cryptic, it could be that Ruprath here has made a good decision because they can get DRS down this straight, tuck in behind through the 3rd sector, and then have a go at repassing them down the start-finish straight. Both cars with a flashing red light at the back again, though, so again, doesn't look as though there's much opportunity for passing between these two, unless there's a big difference in setup.
Yeah, once again, Castleman holds the position on Povey. So we are on the penultimate lap of the race, and looks like Ruprath and Cryptic, a little bit of a gap has opened up between the two of them. I don't think Ruprath will have the opportunity to re-attack down the pit straight. We'll take a look, although, because he's closing at quite a rate. It's just going to come up a little short. He was nearly a second back at the start of the pit straight and got it down to about 3/10. This is an impressive run of speed down the pit straight, but not quite enough to do it. But the man who's not had a whole lot of camera time will go over to, well, I say the lead of this race. We'll see what the camera switches to, or if it's going to just choose who it wants to look at. There we go. Fraser, on his return to the grid, has had quite the day out front.
Certainly has. Through the final corner they go to start their final lap of this race. And Fraser then, after a good time out, a good while out, it looks as though the Mercedes driver, newly Mercedes driver, it has to be said, is making their way through the next few corners then on something of a victory lap. They were losing time earlier on, but then once Castleman and Povey got too stuck into their fight with one another, it looks as though whatever advantage they had has now been taken away, and Fraser now is the one in the driving seat. As Povey and Castleman continue to fight one another, it looks as though that battle will stay as is for the rest of this lap, unless Povey can bring something spectacular out of the bag here. We can keep an eye on this battle until the lead car comes around the final corner.
Luke has caught this group with Queasy and F50 very quickly.
Ooh.
He's got some speed. He's got some serious pace. Is he going to overtake it by the end? He's got one more DRS zone to go down from turn 9 to 10, but I mean, just look how close he's gotten.
Very close indeed, and that's on tyres. They're the same age as the cars in front as well. In fact, older than Queasy. And so that's been a great drive from Luke, but an even greater drive at the front of the field, because Fraser, on their return to FRS F1, comes through the final turn, and they take the win here in the Spanish Grand Prix. A little bit of a burnout for good measure as well. Major Castleman comes across the line ahead of MJ Povey in the end, rounding out your podium. Fraser Castleman and Povey. Then Wild Poros, a great drive from the Ferrari driver, getting themselves back into a good competitive place. And P4 for them. Mako, having a quiet race in the end, is able to bring home the Aston Martin in P5. Queasy Pluto will come through the final turn, and Luke is off the circuit. Oh dear, oh dear.
He didn't quite make the move on F50 into turn 9, and then in the final chicane coming into it, had a big kind of snap of oversteer. Habs Van Nick and Cryptic both sneak through, so Cryptic manages to get back into the points. Luke come home 10th, and Ruprath just misses out because of that 3-second time penalty.
Absolutely, yeah. Poor old Rutrath down in P11 for them. But in a race which I think, and we'll have to ask you, because you're the stat man, about this later on and have the answer ready for next week. But this looks like the FRS race with the most finishes in history. 18 cars crossed the line.
Record. 18 just might be a record. I'd have to go back and look at the stats. But I think you're right. I think that might be an absolute record on finishers. So
there we
well
go.
done.
Brilliant bit of racing out the front then, and it's a familiar sight to those of us who covered PC Division 1. Fraser in the Mercedes overalls comes back out on the top step of the podium and claims their first win in Season 7. Will it be their last? Will the reserve come back full time and make a late championship charge? We will wait and see. Hopefully they do. It will make things a lot more exciting to an already very exciting championship battle. The lead is still Castleman's, but still not by much as they head into the next round of the season. We will join you there for round 5. But until then, we hope that you enjoy the rest of your days, evenings, or whatever it is that you're up to. And from us, good morning, good afternoon, and good night.